All right. I'd like to introduce Mr. Barry MacDougal. He received his undergrad right here from UCLA. He then went on to get his MBA at Harvard.
Okay, in spite of that.
He was in the Navy. He just served as a destroyer chief engineer, and he left the Navy with the rank of lieutenant. He spent 18 years as a chairman and CEO of Mark Controls. He has served in several government advisory roles. And finally, he served for 32 years on the board of UPS. So please join me in welcoming Barry MacDougal.
It's great to be here. I remember how terrified I was sitting in one of these classrooms at business school, and I was an engineer out of UCLA. My only sort of business experience, I was business manager of the Daily Bruin, which, by the way, I noticed is getting thin. We used to have a lot more ads. There's an entrepreneurial opportunity for somebody there. But we had, the very first day, I used to sit in the second row kind of off to the side so I wouldn't be noticed, but I would be close enough to know what was going on. And there was a legendary professor named Ted Levitt, whom you might have read some of his marketing stuff. And he would walk in looking very sort of stern. And then on the early days when you didn't realize what it is that's supposed to happen in this sort of collegial setting, he would spin around and say, "Mr. MacDougal, what do you think?" And then, what do I think about what? And pretty soon you learn that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And at the end of the year, I got pretty used to that. And I used to think I was particularly timid, an engineer, and I didn't know debit from credit. And then the dean of the school, a fellow named Jay Light, said, one of the toughest things about business was my first year at business school, and I had Ted Levitt, and he used to swing around and attack me. But I think this setting is great. I'm a chairman of a foundation in Eastern Europe, about 450 million, and we're trying to plant free markets and capitalism in those countries. And we just put this exact same style classroom in Sofia University in Bulgaria. And 2 months ago, I was at the dedication of that. So this style that you're part of and the technology that goes with it is spreading the world, and I think it's going to be a good thing. But I won't get into politics. Let's get on with what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk for about a half hour, and that'll leave some time for Q&A. Besides, the research shows that for the first 15 minutes you talk, people pay attention. The second 15 minutes, their minds strip. And at the third 15 minutes, they're off into sexual fantasies. So I will not talk so long that you'll really enjoy it. I'd like to know a little bit more about you. How many of you are with big companies, let's say 1,000 people or more? Oh dear. And you want to talk about entrepreneurism? I must be in the wrong place. How about 500 to 1,000? Any small ones, 500 or less? Oh, okay. I'll speak to you all. I think, and how many are on your own? Consultants or between assignments? Well, that'll give me an idea. My company, Mark Controls, you probably have never heard of. However, this very building, if you look at the thermostats very closely, it says Powers. And that was one of our divisions. Mark Controls had building controls, number 3 to Honeywell and Johnson. And the number 3 spot's a pretty good one to be in because Honeywell and Johnson are big, sleepy, bureaucratic companies. And we were able to get pieces of market share, which were very, very important to us, not so important to them. And my credentials are that the stock went from 10 when I came in, having borrowed money to have a small position and having options and no money at all of my own, and the stock went to 160. And that allows me to walk around the country and win bag to folks like you with some sort of credibility as an entrepreneur. Being a CEO of a public company for 18 years is hard work because you do have your report card in the Wall Street Journal every 90 days. And that can be a very tough, demanding discipline, especially in my case, in the 70s, where the stock market as a whole went nowhere. You look at it at the beginning of the 70s and the end, it's the same place. We had Jimmy Carter inflation, all kinds of stuff. So tenacity is pretty important. You got to hang in there until that moment occurs when you can really sort of capitalize on it. In talking to folks about what you wanted to hear, I came up with really 4 things. One is, this is a leadership seminar kind of thing, as I understand it. We'll sort of talk a little bit about that. My experience, I do talking at the University of Chicago and Northwestern, and they have a lot of speakers, but not that many that have been CEOs. And so I'm thinking that might have some value to you. I noticed the Entrepreneurs Hall, many of the folks that I've known, it shows you how old I am, but a lot of them are in service functions, a lot of them were investors, but not so many actually running companies. So I'm assuming there's some sort of value in talking about that. And your handout was an interview a professor at the University of Chicago did. He did a case on me and Mark Controls, and that's sort of a distillation of some of the things we're going to be talking about. The whole case and the rest of me is on www.MacDougal.com. And there's some articles I've written in various places that elaborate on some of these points. So let me start with leadership. You've all studied stuff by Peter Drucker, I assume, at some point? Is that yes? Oh, yeah. Okay. He, if you caught him in the morning, he drank a lot at lunch, but the fellows I know that really revered him, and some CEOs of large companies that would run out to Pomona and have the morning with him, he's really had a lot to say that's worthwhile, even though he has not been a manager himself. But the foundation of leadership is really having a mission that you have for your organization, that your organization has articulated for you. I'm assuming you're in some sort of middle management spot. How many of you have people working for you that, let's say, 5 or more? Okay, so a good half of you do. And you're in a position to hire and fire and to articulate some sort of mission for the group that you head. Let me assume that. When I was a partner at McKinsey in my youth, one of the exercises I used to follow was to ask the CEO what he thought his mission was and what the objectives were of the company. And he would say, well, we want to do this and such a market, and we want to do that, and we want to grow, and this and that. And so I'd write them down. And one of the ways I would insert myself into the organization and create the impression that I was adding value was go to the vice presidents and say, well, what do you think the organization is all about? And you're supposed to be doing, and often those would be at variance with what the CEO did. So setting goals and priorities and standards so that it's not just you or a small group of people at the top of your organization, but really is fully understood down below is crucially important and not followed as often as you might think. And leadership, I think, needs to be something that's not because some company said, okay, you've got this title, but rather it's earned by you in your working relationships with the people that work for you. And there was an article recently, as some of you might have seen in the Wall Street Journal, about a leader describing that he wanted to be someone, well, actually, he put himself up for election every so often. In effect, do you want this person to be your leader? And I don't think you need to do that, although I used to have anonymous surveys from my company, the top 200 managers, where they would evaluate me as well as Vice President of Finance and others. And it was anonymous, and they knew it was anonymous. So I think a key part of leadership is really being a leader rather than somebody who's been put into a spot and who expects people to obey them. At my company, whoever got there first got the first parking spot. We all flew coach. There was no sort of hierarchy. That, to me, starts to speak of real leadership. And in that 17 years, we had almost no turnover. And I still get letters from people saying that working in our company was the best part of their life. They got through the stock options, which is another important part of ownership, send their kids to college. All the happy things that you hope are going to happen ended up happening, although during that period we had a few near-death experiences, and the whole thing almost came down in the form of bankruptcy a couple of times. I think another thing just on leadership, for whatever it's worth, and my idea on a talk like this is, if you come away with one idea that you think you might use at some point, it will have been a worthwhile half hour. So I'm going to rattle off a bunch of things, and maybe there'll be one thing where I'll see you pick up your pencil and you say, hey, that's something that's worthwhile. But this one, I think, is perhaps the most important, and that is doing whatever you can. In a big company, it's not so easy to bring in people that are really strong. They're stronger than you are. That people that, like my vice president of finance, I was a finance major at business school. I wrote articles on finance at the Harvard Business School. I was chairman of the finance committee of a company, UPS, with 450,000 employees. But he was much sharper at picking out the layers down, what was going on, and spotting things that we should be paying attention to. He was much better on pricing. We'd have our quarterly budget meetings, and he would say, I might forget to say, but he would say, what would happen if you raised the prices 10%? What do you think the impact would be? Now, usually the sales guy is afraid to do that. The general manager isn't quite sure. And one of in my mind, the major weaknesses of managers, the two major weaknesses that I'll come to, but is timidity in pricing. Timidity in pricing has left more money on the table for entrepreneurs and managers than you can shake a stick at. And this guy was terrible with people. I was always untangling him from remarks that he made. How many of you are finance types, VPs of finance or in the finance world? Well, you look fine, but there's something generically built in. If you're really good with numbers, you don't tolerate fools so well, and you're known to make remarks that require the CEO to step in, and he didn't really need it. So I say that because I've had experience with 3 of them like that. And but one I kept for 15 years, because he was so damn good at everything else. And what you have to do is buy the package and work with it. So anyway, hiring people that are stronger than you are. A huge weakness is people having yes men, women, and not getting the value of the management team. And then leading by example. If you're in the office all day Saturday, all the other folks will feel they ought to be in the office all day Saturday, and you're going to end up with out of whack home life for folks, and you're going to have turnover. So you need to think about the whole person and how you're going to keep them, as I was fortunate to, working as a team for, in my case, 17 years, with only 1 or 2 exceptions. So you have to set an example. And if you, by the same token, if you show up late for work, don't be surprised if other people think that that's okay.